Hi, everybody. So, my next guest, third guest of this season, he was brought up by an atheist father, a humanist mother, and somehow, by the grace of God, he became an Anglican vicar. How is it possible? With God, all things are possible. Years after this short intro, we'll see you on the other side. Right. Hi, Jasper. How are you?
I'm great. It's good to see you today.
Oh, it's good to see you. I was telling my guest before the intro that you had an atheist father, humanitarian mother, and you still managed to become a vicar, an Anglican vicar, sorry. But
Indeed,
indeed, I mean, that's crazy, isn't it? How God works in mysterious ways.
it does.
He
That's
does.
so true.
God works in
Yeah.
mysterious ways, Rupi. You've got to be quiet.
Well, I
Right.
love the fact the dog's joining in.
Rupi, right, 2 minutes. Okay. Sorry for that slight interruption by Rupi. But
That's
as
all right.
I was saying, you became an Anglican priest or vicar in the end. But before all this happened, can you tell us a bit about your childhood, what that looked like?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I was brought up in a nice family, but a family which didn't actually have any religious background or faith really. My dad did dabble in New Age things. Um, he would talk to spirits occasionally and do things like that. And my mother, on the other hand, was a humanist, so she didn't really. She was very rational in her thinking. For her, if you can't see it, if you can't work it out, it isn't real. It tends to be her approach to life. That said, I think my mum's mum was a bit of a churchgoer, so they did occasionally take me to church, particularly at Christmas, sometimes at Easter, but that was about it. I was sent away to boarding school, which happened to be a Catholic boarding school because it was considered to get better results.
So
And
it's all about
but
the
being a Catholic,
academic.
although I wasn't a Catholic,
Yeah.
it meant that I was required to go to church on Sunday, although they sent me to the local Anglican church because I wasn't a Catholic.
Wow. So the
Although
school sent you to an Anglican church.
I know, so they sent me and one other guy. We had to walk off down the road to this Anglican church, whilst all the other students went to the chapel in the
Ah,
school.
that's interesting. Twist of
Indeed,
events. Yeah, very interesting twist of events. So basically, your parents, when you got to a certain age, they shipped you off to boarding school, didn't they?
yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Which I
And
wasn't
how?
very happy about.
Yeah.
And I struggled with this, and it was all male boarding school. But I was there for 2 years, and then they brought me back. But shortly after coming back from boarding school, my dad left my mum, and so he separated, and then finally remarried a few years later. And so that was a sad episode of my childhood, which otherwise had been happy really up until when I went to boarding school.
Yeah.
Um, but all that time, I didn't really know whether I believed in God. I actually, strangely, remember before I became interested in faith in any real way, remember thinking, actually would wake up and I would have this conversation with myself. Do I believe in God today or not? I think it's 51% today, and then I don't know, it's only 49%. Why that came from? I think perhaps I had a bit of religious education at school that inspired that
Yes.
internal conversation in myself.
Yeah, because that's a shame, really, because nowadays we don't have that religious education in schools anymore. And that's a
No,
real little seed that can be planted when we're younger about who God
yeah,
is. So even though
yeah.
your parents denied God, you had that opportunity to meet him.
Yes, yes. I mean, I think perhaps it'd be too strong to say they deny God. It was
Okay.
more. My mum didn't really know, and thought if God existed, probably somebody who wound the clock up and let it, at the beginning of the universe and then let it run, type thing. That was my mother's approach. Whereas
Yeah.
my dad, he believes in all sorts of spirits, including the God, but
Oh,
obviously
right.
he
Okay.
was connecting to the wrong ones. So
Wow.
it wasn't that they were not didn't believe God existed at all. They weren't atheists, either of them, I wouldn't have said, but they were
Okay.
both my mum was very agnostic, and my
Wow.
dad was believing the wrong things.
Yeah. 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 Did your dad ever come to faith in the end? Or did he?
That's a very interesting question. He died a few
Yeah.
years ago. I had a 2-week warning. I spent some time with my dad in those last 2 weeks trying to share faith, talking about faith. He wasn't very receptive. He kept saying, no, no, I'm not interested, things like that. And so much so that at one point my sister had to come to me and say, I think he's asking, he doesn't want you to talk about faith anymore. So that was obviously disappointing to me. But then he lost consciousness, and just before he died, he briefly regained consciousness. And he just said this to me. He said, "You are right." Now, I like to think that those words, "you are right," is to do with faith and salvation, but that's all he said. Then he lost consciousness again, and then he never spoke again when he's not in my presence. So I like to hope that he had a God encounter in some way, but I have no way of knowing that for certain. It could have been referring to my preference for a certain type of food. But I'm hoping he was talking about faith.
I mean, I'm sure you were praying for him over those 2 weeks.
Of course. Oh, very much so.
There you go.
Very much so. Yeah.
There you
absolutely.
go.
And it was a tough 2 weeks. I did think I did most of my grieving in those 2 weeks. But by the time he died, there wasn't much grief left in me. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So after boarding school, what did your education look like then? Where did you go? Did you go to college, or did you go to university, or what was not university, because would it be boarding school then university? So I've got that right, haven't I?
I went to school first, then university. So,
then university,
I was only boarding school for 2 years. That was my mum's choice. So my dad then got to choose the next school, and I went to a international school because he was very interested in people from different countries. His work involved, he worked for the British Tourist Authority, so he's very much involved with meeting people from different countries. So I went to that school for 2 years, but then that didn't. My mum was concerned that he didn't have the right qualifications, so then she got to choose the next one, and so then I went to a grammar school, turning comprehensive. This is in the years when they were getting good at grammar school, so I was the last grammar year. But that was a very different experience. Very contrasting schools. One was a school for very wealthy children. I was on a bursary, private school, and then the next school, the grammar school, obviously was free, and it was in a poor area. So I went from being the poor kid to the rich kids. It was a very strange experience for me.
What? So you're the poor kid at the private school?
Previous school, yeah, the private school, and then the rich kid at the grammar school. Yeah,
comprehensive. Wow. Okay.
So I had £1 pocket money a week. And I had £1 pocket money a week, and at the rich school, many of them had £10 pocket money a week. And I went to do the grammar school, and people didn't have any pocket money a week.
Wow. So how did you fit in after coming from the boarding school to the grammar / comprehensive school? Did you fit in okay?
I fitted in okay. I mean, I was bullied because I was new and an outsider. But that's just life. But I adjusted to that. Almost got into a fight at one point, but I think I did get into a fight because some kid kept picking on me and then started hitting me, so I ended up fighting him. But it was at this school. It was this sort of school. It was a church within the school, so I did a bit of religious education. The only thing I really remember is the story of the Good Samaritan, which really stuck with me.
Oh, okay. So why did that stick with you?
I don't know. I probably liked the idea. I mean, my mum was always into doing good works. My mum's always been that way inclined. Later in life, she ended up working with drug users who were needing housing, and she worked in this project. So she's always been that way orientated a bit. And so I think I got that from my mother. And it's probably perhaps I just seemed the right thing to do, really. Yeah. And it struck me that other people weren't doing the right thing, and the Good Samaritan was, I suppose. I don't know, but I'm guessing that might have been the reason.
I think it's like when you've been bullied at school, because when I went to my very first primary school, I got seriously attacked badly, And but it kind of gives you a heart for people who are probably on the outskirts of life, marginalized. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's probably what
very much
to you. So. Is that what happened to you? Like
yes,
got bullied. You kind of saw it's not nice to be the odd one out. Let's help the odd one out, maybe.
Yes, and also the fact that there's a huge disparity between the very wealthy at one school and the very poor at another school. And inevitably, you start asking questions about why is that? Why is there such a huge difference? Why, and so I was asking that question, and I was experiencing bullying and being, as you say, on the outside. And so all those things definitely formed me.
Exactly. So now you've left university, or maybe actually, because we were talking yesterday, you said that university you joined some kind of Christian group or something like this. And
Yes,
what led you to joining this?
could we perhaps go back slightly? Because
Yeah.
between when my journey of faith really started, just before I went to university, when I actually decided to go and see a local minister at the church. It was an Anglo-Catholic minister at the local Anglican church.
Oh,
I went with my sister.
Yeah.
And we met with this guy who was very interesting. He was a chain-smoking Anglo-Catholic priest, but very effective at communicating about Jesus. And he told these stories about Jesus, which really got me interested. He talked about this miracle-working person who taught things that other people didn't teach. I thought church was boring. And this didn't sound boring at all. So, because all my experience of faith up to that point, my occasional attendance of rather boring churches and my RE experience hadn't told me this is something exciting or something that could change your life. But this started to give me a different angle. So when he suggested that, given I was going to university, I perhaps should take a book which had some prayers in it and some Bible readings in it, I decided, I'm going to try this out. I'm going to test this out and see whether this is worth pursuing. So I did that, and I was very religious really about it. Every day I would pray and I would read this reading. And then one day I was in my room doing this or something like this, and I sensed the presence in the room.
Wow.
And I realized the presence was God, and I think it felt like a loving presence. And so this really touched me, and I thought it started to show me that this wasn't just something I was doing and practicing, and maybe it was true, but that I really started to believe, no, this is real. This is I've not created this feeling. I didn't expect to get this. I haven't manufactured it. I haven't put special music on. It just suddenly happened.
Yeah.
So I started pursuing it more. Now, interestingly, God had gone before me. And so when I went to university, I found myself sharing with another Christian, sharing my accommodation with another Christian. And he also broke my stereotype of church, because he went to some kind of evangelical church, and which wasn't in his denomination. And I imagine Christians were, do-gooders who always dressed in a boring way. That type of thing. I don't know. That would seem to be my impression for some reason. And he just broke all that mold and that assumption. So that was helpful to me as well.
Yeah. Okay. So you went to a few other Christian kind of like clubs or whatever. I don't know if they're Christian clubs we were talking about the other day. I can't remember what you said they were. But you joined.
Yes, well, what happened actually is I wasn't initially interested. I mean, I went to church, but wasn't particularly pursuing the idea of joining clubs. But then this guy from Campus Crusade to Christ, he knocked on my door, and he wanted to go through a book called Knowing God. Now, Knowing God is an interesting booklet, and it has diagrams in it, which includes two circles. One circle has the cross at the center, and the other circle has the cross on the outside. And he said, which of you is Christ at the center of your life, or is Christ outside your life? Now, I didn't like that challenge, because I knew Christ wasn't at the center, but I didn't believe he was on the outside either. He wasn't giving an option which reflected where I was. And so I was a bit uncomfortable about this, and firmly but nicely showed him the door eventually.
Jasper.
And the poor guy may well have gone away thinking, well, I'll just pray, hope something happens. I don't know if anything did, but we have to trust God, don't we, type of feeling about it. But I want to encourage people who do evangelism. It's like people don't always respond well at the time. It doesn't mean to say you haven't started a process in their lives that starts them to ask questions they weren't asking before. That's exactly what happened to me. So in the next few weeks, I was wrestling with, am I going to put Christ at the center? That all mean that other things can't be at the center. I understood that. I knew you can have several things at the center. I got that. As an engineer in training, I understand that, you can have one thing at the center. So I decided in the end I was going to put Christ at the center. And so I didn't look back from that point. But by about this time, I was about coming to the end of my second year. I tried to go to a club associated with the local church I was attending. Discover all they did was drink coffee and talk about anything but faith. So that wasn't what I was looking for. So in the third year, when I started my third year, I went to the Freshers Fair and join the Christian Union. And they immediately referred me into a local diggers group, which was basically a local Bible study and prayer group just where I lived. And I joined them, and they were amazing. They were lovely people. They were very loving and accepting. They even allowed me to lead a Bible study about my 6th week or something ridiculous. I mean, here a new Christian being encouraged to lead a Bible study on Romans. I went out and bought an all Bible commentary. So I could find, the only thing I could immediately find. I couldn't find a Romans commentary, but I could find a commentary on the whole Bible. So I got that, and then in a very studious way, I studied this bit of Romans so I could look competent when I led the Bible study.
Yeah, well done. I mean, because it can be quite daunting when you have to lead a Bible study. You've never done anything like that before. You know, it's not easy. Right. But obviously, your relationship with God is getting stronger and stronger. Now, what happened next? And that kind of, what age are we now, would you say?
So now, golly, I must have been about 22.
22.
Because I only went to university at 19. 21, 22. So then I finally left Leeds and went on couldn't get a job, so went on to do a master's course in Sheffield University. This was during the recession of the 80s, so jobs were quite hard to find, even if you had degrees. And so I went to get further qualified to try and get a job. And went to Sheffield, and there I joined the Christian Union again. And it so happened that Billy Graham was coming to Sheffield that year, 1985, I think it was.
1985.
And so I signed up to be a counsellor at a Billy Graham event.
A counsellor?
And a counsellor, which means that at the end, when people come forward, they put up their hand and say, I want to follow Christ, or I want to renew my commitment to following Christ. Then they go down to the front, and they're referred to counsellors. And the counsellor's job is to go through them, explain exactly what they're doing, say a prayer with them, and then hopefully refer them to a particular church. So they've got somewhere to be discipled. So that was the job. I mean, I'm not sure how well it always worked, but that was the theory, that they'd end up at the church and being discipled there. But as a preparation for that, I spent some time praying and fasting one morning. Now, I never fasted before in my life. This was a first, and I like my food. So some people don't have breakfast. I always had breakfast. So for me, not to have breakfast was a big thing. Not to have my coffee and biscuit halfway through the morning was a big thing as well. I love my food. But I did this, but I struggled because I wasn't having any caffeine, anything to keep me awake. So, of course, I kept falling asleep. As I knelt, because I thought it was a proper thing to do was to kneel by my bed. So, because it wasn't a great place to stay awake, so I kept falling asleep. So I felt a bit of failure by the end of the morning. I thought I must have slept half that prayer time.
Fasting and prayer, just slept through it. Yeah,
I know, but I did my best anyway. So then I had lunch, and I think God was quite happy with my best because He looked at the heart, not my performance. And that's something I've had to learn in life, that He looks at the heart more than your performance. But anyway, during lunch, I started to feel really, really unusual inside, and this joy seemed to be starting to break out within me, and it got more and more intense. I didn't know what to do with this. It's almost like I was drunk. I thought, wow, what is this? What's happening to me? I haven't taken any drugs. I don't think my food's poisoned. What else going on? And it so happens that day there was some evangelists from the Christian Union going into the centre of town, and I'd been invited to go and join them. Well, I thought, I bet God's obviously doing something here, so I better go and join them. And looking back, and I recognise that was my moment of being baptised in the Holy Spirit. I think God had probably got tired of waiting for somebody to pray for me, so He just did it unilaterally.
Oh, amazing!
So I was then full of the Spirit and going down into town, and went with a more experienced evangelist. I say more experienced, but he had a slightly funny approach to evangelism. I mean, we met these 3 young 15-year-old lads in the underpass in Sheffield city centre. One got bored quite quickly, but the other 2 seemed to be engaged, even though he started the conversation by talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Well, I know something about communicating with young people, and that's not the way I'd have started the conversation, even if I'm trying to evangelize. But he did that for some reason, but amazingly, because the Holy Spirit was powerfully present, even though the conversation was not the best. They were convicted, and they confessed to us that they'd stolen some things. We gave them Bibles or New Testaments, and it obviously had a real impact on them. And I really saw that day as a call for my work, my future work with young people, and my future work as an evangelist.
So after you were ministering to the two young boys with your friend, what happened then?
Well, nothing more happened on the day. They just went away with their Bibles.
Oh,
I hadn't learned exactly. I hadn't, I was still quite new to evangelism. I was looking to this other guy to lead me, and I never really heard what happened. Whether he followed it up or not, I don't know. But what happened shortly after that really was that I went to an interview for a job. Now I did, as I said before, I'd done this extra year to try and get this job. I was looking for a job potentially in the oil industry, and I was offered a job by BP. I went to this weekend interview where they wined you and dined you and interviewed you thoroughly. But during this weekend, as I was praying, I had the sense that God didn't want me to take the job, which was a bit awkward because, well, I spent all this time training to try and get a job like this. And of course, what they wanted me to do was they wanted me to go and work on different oil platforms for 6 months at a time as a way of getting training and experience. The problem was that God was indicating to me that as a new Christian, he wanted me to stay in one place and get grounded in my faith, not disappear. I mean, how many churches do you find on oil platforms? I mean,
yeah,
probably wouldn't be the best place to grow your faith with it.
Exactly.
So I reluctantly, well, not reluctant. Initially, I was reluctant, but eventually I came around and said, "Okay, Lord, I'll do that." So I turned down the job. Of course, my parents thought I'd lost the plot, and I said, "Well, Lord, if you want me to go into engineering, there's another job coming up with a company called BOC, British Oxygen Company." Now, I'd actually had an interview with them before when I'd done my first degree, and got a second interview and then been turned down. So when they invited me to another interview, I thought, well, maybe they really want me.
Maybe this is where God wants to send me. Yeah, that's what you're thinking.
That's right. I went, I had a second interview, and again they turned me down. I thought, so that's a real clear closed door in my mind. And I prayed about this. I asked the Lord to open the door. He wanted me to go into engineering, and the door was firmly closed. No other interviews came my way. So I concluded that was clearly the Lord's will for me not to go into engineering. So instead, I sought the Lord and ended up going on a applied theology course, which I spent a year on. I went to a church in central London, and it connected that church with a community church, and I started getting involved with that after that year. And that led me into the youth work I talked about. God very clearly put on my heart I should get involved with the youth club. Many of these kids we were working with were inner city kids with quite tough, difficult backgrounds. But I felt, and they were alienated, perhaps not quite the way I had been alienated as a young person, but they were. And God often redeems us, doesn't he? The thing that he takes us through and that we find healing in or breakthrough on, he then uses us to help get healing or breakthrough in other people's lives. And so here I was, and now trying to work with other people, other young people who weren't like me, weren't yet Christians, and trying to support them, work alongside them, build relationships with them, and share my faith where possible. So that started. I also got into teaching, because what else could I do with an engineering degree if I couldn't do engineering? So I trained to be a teacher and taught a subject called Science, Technology and Society, which is a GCSE subject at the time.
Yeah.
But I really discovered I liked youth work far more than I enjoyed teaching. And so I also felt that God was calling me to more than just teaching or just youth work. I had a sense that I should be involved in working in local communities, that I should be involved in helping people in their discipleship, in their spiritual direction, in their worship. And how could I do all those things? Well, the only obvious thing that came to me as somebody who was familiar most with the Anglican Church was training to become a vicar. Yeah. So that's what I decided to do. I felt God was leading me in that direction. And so I applied, went through various trainings, preparations, including several interviews and a really big weekend interview, a bit like the BP interview when they do exactly the same thing, analyze you from every angle. But then they accepted me for training as an Anglican minister. So
repeat, shush now, seriously, shush. I think it's someone at the door. I can't believe this. What has happened today?
So whilst I was doing youth work and teaching, I had a sense that I was meant to do more than that, that God was calling me into the ministry in some way. Now, I enjoy community work. I felt called to disciple people, to help them in their worship, to help them in their spiritual direction, and so on. So I thought, well, how can I combine all these things? And I thought, well, maybe by becoming a vicar, because I was familiar only with the Anglican Church, and so that was the obvious thing for me to do. So I applied, went on one of these, had lots of interviews, and went on a long weekend where they look at you from every angle. They even the interviewers even sit with you and have social conversations during mealtime. You're constantly being analysed. But fortunately, I got through. Praise God, and so I was able to start training for the Anglican ministry. But this took several years. So in the meantime, I went into youth work, accepted a huge salary cut because I went to a charity, Christian charity, and they said, "Well, we'd like to employ you, but we only
can't pay you
half your salary." They said.
Oh, you got paid. That's good. At least you got.
So I got something, but
yeah.
half what I would have got as a teacher.
Yeah.
So I said I accepted that. I don't know, and they offered me accommodation, and I was able to live for free. So that was a way that I could save money. So I accepted that, and I lived in this with about 8 other people in this big complex next to the youth club.
And how old are you at this point? Because I'm losing track of ages here. How old would you say you were now?
Oh golly, I would have only been about 24, 25.
24, 25.
Or maybe actually 26 by now, or 27.
Still quite
in mid-20s somewhere.
Yeah. Wow. It's amazing you've done so much in such a short space of time, having parents who didn't really encourage you to believe in God. And you're here at 26 years old, training to be, a vicar, minister. What a vicar did you say, or minister or priest?
A vicar. So I wasn't quite in training at 26. I think actually I went into training at about 28. That's when I started the actual training. So I would have been 26, 27 when I was doing youth work.
Yeah.
And so anyway, it was again a Christian youth club, but working with the non-Christian inner city kids, mainly Irish and West Indian, as it turned out. And that was fun. It's challenging. It was challenging, but you really got to be able to share faith and share your life with them.
Just quickly, what kind of problems would these kids have, would you say?
Golly, all sorts of problems. They were failing at school. They'd have a lot of things like dyslexia, or other conditions. They really struggled with the normal expectations of society to get lots of qualifications and then get a good job. These were kids which felt quite alienated, but there was their families probably weren't very pro the education system as it is because it failed them, and so
were there fathers in the families, or were fathers missing?
There were many of them were just single parent families. That's correct.
There
would have been a lot of that. So there were lots of needy young people who needed stable relationships in their lives, so good examples, and so we sought to be that, as well as showing our faith. We tried to show a better way, and we tried to love them unconditionally, even though at times it was hard.
Imagine,
It weren't always nice.
Yeah,
they treated us. But you persevered. I would referee football, and that was never great fun because whoever was losing would blame me for their problems. I made the wrong decision. That's why they're losing.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, interesting. But very interesting when you work with kids like that who really needed that help, but probably didn't really know how to accept the help, but wanted it. But very difficult.
Yeah, but rewarding at the same time because you know you're making a difference. When I finally went to training, I trained for 3 years in Bristol, Trinity College, and then I emerged and took a curacy, which is like a training position in the Anglican Church, in South Leeds, in a place called Holbeck and Beeston Hill. Your city.
Beeston. Wow. Yeah.
And that was again a challenging area, inner city area. And although I was primarily focused on being a curate and being a minister at a church, I quickly took an interest in young people hanging around the outside of church. And it turned out these 15, 16, 17-year-olds were also drug addicts, indeed heroin addicts. And so I ended up feeling called by God to set up a project to try and work with them, which was exciting. Although I perhaps hadn't quite learned that although I was very keen to get them off drugs and introduce them to faith, if they weren't keen to get off drugs, it wasn't very easy to actually move them and make any difference. I kept setting up opportunities for them to get help, and they kept not turning up those opportunities, or only turning up once and things like that, because they weren't really desperate enough to get off drugs, and that was their hard lesson I had to learn.
Right. So how long were you in Beeston for then?
So I was in Beeston and Holbeck for 3 years in total.
3 years.
I wanted to stay longer. I wanted to talk to continue working with those young people a bit more. But the bishop was old school, and his view was 3 years, you'll do training and that's it. All he was interested in was the training. He didn't seem at all concerned with anything else I was involved with, bless him. So therefore he insisted I moved on. I'm not sure to this day whether it was the correct thing to do, whether I should simply have stepped out of paid ministry at that point and continued in the work and let God provide some way. But at the time, I was advised by everybody, it's a good idea to let other people just continue what you started and you move on. And so I listened to the advice, which I suspect was more people than the Holy Spirit. Anyway, I then moved on to
listen
our
to
next
man,
church,
not God, maybe.
London.
But it's difficult when you're in a situation like that, I suppose. So then you moved, sorry, where's that, to a church?
So then I moved to London, actually, to Ealing.
Wow, Ealing.
And I was at a church there. But interestingly, whilst I was at this church, two interesting things happened. One was that one of the young people I had been connected to in Leeds, one of the heroin addicts, was put in prison. And he started writing to me. So we started a writing exchange when he admitted he felt he was struggling between light and darkness. And he became spiritually very open, and I was able to lead him literally through. This is before emails. I was able to. Well, emails are very early days of emails, at least, so he wasn't doing email. So we did letters, and he actually came to faith through that process of exchanging letters, joined the chaplaincy in the prison, and started helping the chaplain out, which was great. But the sad point I want to make is when he came out of prison. He attended the church I used to be involved with once, completely failed to connect with it, didn't go to it anymore, and fell away from faith. And for me, this just underlines the fact that we've got to have new wineskins for the new wine. We've got to do church in a way which is relevant and appropriate for young people who have no background in church whatsoever.
You're so right. It's a shame. The churches that we have nowadays, God has left the building basically in a lot of them. You're not getting any real relationship with him. To get a relationship maybe with the vicar or the priest or whatever, maybe. Like you said, the place you went to when you were younger, where they were just drinking tea and coffee and chatting, and you can see God anywhere. It's such a shame because people start to think that that's what God is all about. Nothing.
No, I don't want to be unfair to that church. I mean, that church was good in many respects, and there were some good people there, and they were serious about faith. But they had a particular way of going about it, which wouldn't have been relevant or connected with those young people. And the other thing about when I was at this other church in London was actually God started speaking to me when I was on retreat about my perfectionism, and He told me to stop focusing on my performance, because I think I was concerned. I was a bit of a people pleaser in those days, and I was concerned to look good in people's eyes, and so I'd make a lot of effort to do things really well, so I would be accepted and people would like me. And also, of course, working with heroin addicts, I was concerned not to fail, and I wanted to be successful in that work. And so I started to I was working too much on my own strength and not much not enough in the Lord's strength. And He was talked to me about that, but I made minor changes to my life, and so I started to go downhill fast and suffered nervous exhaustion, and for a short period of time was obsessive compulsive in my behavior, whilst the Lord completely redid my spirituality. I had become somebody who completely who basically was an activist. As you can tell from all my work, I was very keen on doing things and making a difference. But even my spiritual life was really intercession and reading the Bible to see how much I could get through. So it was all about achievement and performance and doing things. I wasn't receiving from God.
About it, your parents were all about your performance and what university should he go to, what school next. what job should he take. So you've been brought up that way in a way. So it's kind of
Particularly my mother.
understandable. Oh
Absolutely.
yeah.
I think that she was brought up that way, and she, she was very much, she wanted me, and she, for very good reason, she wanted me to do well. She wanted me to earn lots of money, like many good parents might want
Yeah.
for their children.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure it's so much just her fault. It was a number of factors, but it was partly my own attempt to turn my life around when I was at boarding school, which I didn't really go into detail earlier. But I struggled, and I realized I felt I needed to perform in order to be accepted, in order to not be the worst person in my class academically, to not be the worst person in terms of sports. And so I made lots of effort to turn my life around by performing and by improving myself, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But the problem was I was now depending on myself far more. I was depending
Your
on
own
God.
strength. Yeah.
And the key thing was I wasn't receiving what I needed to receive from God. So what he showed me in this time is I started to I had to slow right down so I could receive his peace. And I lit a candle. And I would often do Teze chants. You remember Teze? I don't know if you do, but it was just simple chants like, "Oh Lord, hear my prayer." And I just, and it just slowed me right down and got me into receiving mode. Now, of course, I'm not saying you need to use Teze or light candles, but for me at the time, that was what was available.
Calmed you
That's what I
down,
knew.
kept you on his frequency and not your own.
That's right. And I started just spending time just sitting in his love, sitting in his peace. And then I started to use worship songs just to soak in his presence and so on and so forth. And started to really receive and abide far more in his presence rather than just being this mega activist.
Exactly. So after London, what happened next?
So then I went to Sheffield.
Wow.
I took a job as a vicar in charge of an inner city church. You see a theme here: inner city, apart from London, which wasn't.
Yeah.
It was a church that met in a converted pub. It just started meeting there, and I went to be their first vicar of this newly created parish church. But it was again a very challenging area where most people didn't go to church. It was a fairly non-book culture, so you had to be quite innovative how you did faith and how you did church. So it was good practice for me to learn to run church in new and different ways. We had a big focus on mission. We tried different ways to reach young people, particularly through Kids Club was one thing we used, something from Bill Wilson developed in the Bronx in New York. A great method for doing fun activities which talk about the Bible and dramatize the Bible and sing fast, exciting songs and get non-Christian young people really involved and excited about faith. And then you get their parents involved to support that process. And we actually saw one or two of the parents actually come to faith through, hearing it all through the Kids Club. We also we partnered with The Message in having an Eden team at our church, and that was where you get a group of people who come and volunteer and move into your area and do youth work and try and form relationships with the young people and try and share faith. And as a consequence of that, we set up cell groups where we sought to disciple young people. And so that was an exciting time of innovation, of trying to find new ways of doing mission, new ways of really reaching the unreached. They truly were. But
so
at the same
you
time,
had success with that then?
Well, yes, obviously we saw some people come to faith. We saw some young people come to faith. I remember baptizing some of those young people, which was wonderful.
Oh, baptizing. Yeah. Amazing.
We ended up even fostering one of those young people whose family got into crisis and she needed support and help, and she came to us for a period, and she's now a wonderful young person who got discipleship through The Message in Manchester and is now working for The Message and sharing her faith with lots of vulnerable and hurting young people. So that's just a wonderful to see that.
True. Yeah, that's amazing. Oh wow. Okay. So yeah.
But also to mention that was a positive. The challenge of that period of time, and I was 14 years there, was it was a very chaotic place to be, in the sense that people live very chaotic lives. You've got people who suddenly their benefits would stop being paid because they didn't know how to do admin. They obviously hadn't responded to the benefits agency in some way, and therefore suddenly their benefits have been cut off. We are constantly having to connect people in with local food banks because people are struggling with the poverty issues We had lots of breakdown in relationships going on all over the place, and people who had really deep issues in their life, and even some of our leaders had quite big issues that we had to work through, and made it harder for them to lead effectively. So it wasn't an easy place to be a church leader, or an easy place to build in the church, really. But it was fruitful up to a point. But one thing I learned was that the institution, that was the Anglican Church, didn't really understand these type of communities. And it was sometimes I got the right type of support and help from the institution. Other times they didn't respond well at all, particularly when I was about to leave, and they misinterpreted certain things, and they tried to get our leaders to do something they weren't happy with. And being local, raw, working class leaders, they told them what they thought.
Oh,
and the Archdeacon basically didn't like that at all.
Not impressed. Yeah.
So it caused problems, particularly when I left. So that's a shame. That was a real shame. But you learn through those things, don't you?
You do.
And that's one of the things that probably impacted me towards starting to think that maybe the Anglican Church wasn't the place to remain in the longer term, because the institution had its limitations, and I don't want to be limited by the institution. I want to be free to do everything that God's asking me to do in the way He's asking me to do it.
So where did that lead you to? That decision where, now, do you know what? I've done the Anglican Church thing, and now I want to be led entirely by God and what He chooses for my future and for the future I lead, so to speak. There's people you're shepherding, so to speak. Where's that led to you now? Where are you now?
Well, me and my wife, in fact, I haven't mentioned my wife up to this point. We met whilst I was at the Beacon. We met at a church conference, which was wonderful and very exciting to meet her. That's another story. We could perhaps cover, if you've got time, we could talk about it at the end or another occasion. But we ended up getting married, and that was great. And she came to help me at the Beacon. But then when she was in parish ministry herself after that, and then we both stepped away, she first and then me. And one day we were traveling and to see my mum. We saw this this for sale sign outside a church, an old traditional church building. And Tina was praying a day or two later and had a real sense that God was asking us to buy this building. Well, there's no way we could do that because we didn't have the money. In fact, we thought that when we stepped down from parish ministry, we'd be sofa surfing, because, of course, the house went with the job, so we wouldn't have a house. And we thought, well, it's a time just to catch up with some people and perhaps move around before we decide where to settle. But God had other plans. And so we prayed about this church. And then finally, Tina's mother, who had been planning to sell her house and move somewhere else, suddenly decided she wanted to move in with us. And it so happened that the money she got for her house was the same as they were wanting for this converted church. So we bought the converted church and moved in. And I had a real sense that God was telling us to start retreats and to run retreats from this place. So we started doing that. We started running Airbnb as well in order to get funding to run the church and to repair the church and to maintain the church.
Is it grade listed building, perchance, your church?
It's grade 2 listed. That's right.
There you go.
I'm sitting in it now, actually. Yeah, that's right. But it was a big challenge for my faith, because remember, both me and my wife on stipend, which is the Anglican term for a salary. They don't call it a salary because the idea is you're given money for ministry, not necessarily to reward you exactly for what you're doing, but to give you money to live on so you can do ministry without having to get another job. But we moved away from that, so neither of us had a stipend anymore. And we had, at that time, savings, but we were employing people. Tina had the coaching business at the time as well. She's doing that part-time, and part-time was a vicar. And so we're still employing people now to help us run this new place. But it was all getting quite expensive, given we didn't have much income coming in when we moved. And so it looked like, if you look at a graph, here's zero and here's our savings. It was going like that.
Oh, dear God. Yeah.
And I was getting more and more fearful about what was going to happen, and we were going to end up in terrible debt. And yes, we cut costs here and there, as the Lord told us to and led us to. But but I had still a serious concern about how fast we seem to be heading to zero.
Yeah.
And we indeed hit zero. And what happened? Well, what happened was this. God somehow put a net out at the bottom. It wasn't that we never went into negative at all,
No.
but God very quickly
Bouncing back
provided.
up again.
We had an overdraft,
Yeah.
facility, but God quickly provided for us, and but it took me a long time to get there. So during my times of fear, the Lord, Tina and the Lord both spoke to me about the importance of studying scriptures, which talked about provision and God's provision, how He could be trusted and He could be relied upon. And I had a focus on those scriptures and keep things like Matthew chapter 6 verse, I think it's 33, where He says, "Seek first the kingdom and His righteousness, and He will meet all your needs." And other scriptures like that, which talk about God's provision, such as in Philippians chapter 4. And as I put my trust in God rather than what I could see, it took me a bit of time. I started to learn to really trust God for His provision. So now we regularly have times when money seems to be running out, but I don't worry about it because I've seen God now come time and time again. Not always the way I want, not always as quickly as I want it, but He always comes through for us in the end, and He always gives us what we need. Because when He calls us to do something, He will provide for it, and He calls us to do this work, and so He does provide for it. Even during lockdown, when one of our big income earners, Airbnb, was closed down by the government. What happened? Well, suddenly our income from other areas went up by exactly the same amount we'd have lost by Airbnb for those 2 or 3 months we were closed. And as soon as we opened again, that other income went down again. So God just perfectly covered it.
Wow, amazing.
I know, it was miraculous.
We're now coming almost to the end of our time together. Is there anything else you'd like to share? I know that you're writing a book at the moment, and I'm sure we'll talk about this at another time. But anything you'd like to share while we have this opportunity?
Well, you've opened the door to that other. So very briefly, I will mention that. It may be of interest to some of the listeners. And that is that when I was in my 20s, it was quite clear that I was, in my sexual orientation, I was homosexual. So I wrestled with this for a while. And then finally, I went to the scriptures and I came quite convicted that God was saying that actually a homosexual lifestyle wasn't something that He welcomed or accepted or wanted people to pursue. And so I because as you know, when I made that decision to put Christ at the center and put Him first, I felt I couldn't pursue a homosexual relationship and be doing that. So I made the decision to refuse to do that. And I said, Lord, if you want me to pursue a heterosexual relationship, you're going to have to bring somebody into my life who I actually am attracted to. And so I prayed that prayer, left it to God. This was my mid-30s by the time I got to pray that prayer. And for 10 years, I was single. And then that's when I met Tina. And initially, we were just friends. We worked together. And then one day, Tina seemed to be showing more interest in me than that. And I was very cautious about this because I thought, well, I'm not really in love with her or anything, so I don't know where this is going to go. But Tina pursued it, though, despite my initial resistance, shall we say. Not active resistance, but I was a bit passive in my response. But gradually and slowly, God warmed. I started to feel more warm towards her, and warmer feelings emerged. Until we really fell in love, and now we have a hopefully healthy marriage life in every respect. So God really did a miracle there, and He turned things around against all the evidence. Because really, I was I wasn't bisexual; I was homosexual in my orientation in my 20s and 30s. So God really turned that around, and so now I'm writing a book about that, which actually addresses both. Shares in a bit more detail what I've just shared with you in the first chapter, and then I've got 2 or 3 other chapters where we explore the whole, the dangers of being too judgmental towards people who've made different choices to ourselves in this area, the importance, however, of dealing quickly with sin, and the importance of serious, committed discipleship,
and knowing God
without compromise.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Jasper, It's been a pleasure. I'm going to put all the links to your actual ministry now down below. And also, if the book's ready by the time this goes out, I'll put that down there. But I'm sure we'll come back to this book at some point because it's fascinating. And I love your story. And there's so much more. I know there's so much more, but we've only got a certain amount of time. But I'd like to invite you back another time anyway. But
that'd be lovely.
So much for the time, Jasper. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
And you too. Thank you so much.
Many people. Okay?
Appreciate it.
All right. We'll talk soon.
Okay.
God bless.
Okay.
Bye.
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 Bye.